This is the video for functions with return in CMU. All right, so what we're talking about is writing functions and then using those functions within CMU. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of minimize the canvas and bring up the console because that's what we're going to be using primarily here. All right, so let's say that we start off with a list of numbers. I'm going to call it nums. All right, and so let's say I have the list 20, 30, 22, 18, 27, 39 and 24. All right. So let's say I have this list. All right. Then I have, let's define a function and we're going to call that function minimum and we're going to use the parameter list. All right. And so then uh, what we're going to do is we're going to write a function that's going to find the minimum in whatever list we have of numbers. All right. And so I'm going to start off with, I'm going to set the minimum value. I'm going to call it min to the first element of the list. Now remember that's list zero, right? The value at index zero in the list. All right. Now what we want to do is we want to loop through the elements in the list. So I'm going to write for x in list. All right. And so that means we're going to loop, right? We're going to start with x is 20, then x is 30, then x is 22, then x is 18, then x is 27, then x is 39, then x is 24. All right. So what do we want to do? We want to ask if x is less than the minimum, right? And if that is true, then we want to set the minimum value equal to x. All right. So now what's going to happen is we're first of all going to say, is x less than the min, right? So is 20 less than 20, right? Because we initially set the min equal to list zero. Well, that's not true, right? So obviously the list is the minimum is 20. All right. Then we're going to say, okay, is 30 less than 20? No. All right. Is 22 less than 20? No. Is 18 less than 20? Yes. And so now we're going to set the minimum equal to 18. All right. Then the next time through the loop, we're going to say, okay, is 27 less than 18? Because 18 is now the value of min. No, that's not true. Is 39 less? No. Is 24 less? No. And so what we want to do is we want to realize now we have found the minimum value in the list. It happens to be 18. All right. So now what happens, okay, when I run this program? Well, initially, right? Nothing happens, right? Well, why? Because we didn't actually even call this function. So let's say I go here, right? And now I'm going to call the function minimum. And what do we need to plug in? Well, remember, list was the parameter, but the specific list that we want is nums. So I'm going to call the function minimum with nums as the argument. Remember, argument is the value that you plug in for a parameter, right? So let's say I run this. Well, what happens? Well, the program ran, right? The minimum function ran, but we never actually told it to do anything with that value. All right. So it's important that you understand this works, right? This program works, but it doesn't actually accomplish anything, or meaning nothing comes out in the console, nothing comes out in the canvas, right? So now what we have to do is we actually have to update this a little bit. We have to put something else in here. All right. So let's say I call the print function and I print the min value, right? So now when I call this function, the min value gets printed, right? Minimum is 18, right? Now let's say I change instead of 30, let's say I change this to 3. Now the minimum is 3, right? Let's say I go back to 30 and now I put this number to be 2, right? So now the minimum is 2, right? So that's great. That prints nicely every time, right? It prints the minimum value. That's great. Okay, but it's not that useful if we just have a print statement here. What we want to do is we actually want to use something called return. Return is a keyword. You'll notice the color changes when I type in that keyword, just like the def color is different, the for color is different, the in color, right? The if, all of those are keywords, right? So then when we use those, they have a specific purpose. They have a specific operation within the programming language. So now what do I want to return? I want to return the value of minimum. Okay. So now the reason that we would return as opposed to print is because now we can use that value anywhere we want. All right. So now let's say I print the value of minimum nums, right? Well, if I print that value, now it's printing the returned value, right? So yes, it's still going to print 18, right? Because I changed those values back to the original list, right? It's still going to print 18. But the important point is now I can actually use that value for other things. Okay. And so that's a big thing. All right. So let's say that we edit our list, right? So let's change the list. So now I've got the list of -2, -5, 8, and 0. All right. And then let's say we make another list. Let's call it nums2. All right. And actually, I'm going to call the first list nums1. All right. And so here's nums2. All right. So let's make that -10, 4, -6, and -20. All right. Now, I still have the same function. I'm not going to touch that function. All right. But now, what happens, right? Well, when I call the minimum function, right now I can say, okay, minimum nums1, right? Then it's going to print that, right? What if I said, okay, print minimum nums2? Now it's going to print that. So the important thing you want to remember about functions is that they're powerful because I can use them on any list that I want, right? Or any input that I want, depending on, what we're working with here. All right. So that's one thing. All right. So that's important to note. But now I can also, because I'm returning the value, I can store it somewhere else. All right. So let's say I create a variable first, and first is equal to minimum nums1. Okay. And then let's say I write second, and I set that to be minimum nums2. Okay, now it's important that you note if I didn't return minimum, I wouldn't be able to set that value equal to something because it would have just been a print statement. All right, so now I have first and second. All right, so now let's say I'm going to print, and now I want to write something like um, the minimum in the first list is. All right, and then I say plus, and now if I were to just put first here, right, I would get an error. Why? Well, because remember, first is a number, right? And so I would have to put an str in front of first in order to make it a string so that I can concatenate it with the minimum in the first list is. All right, so now I do this. I got to bring up my console here, and it says the minimum in the first list is -5, right? That's great. All right. And then what if I said print, and now I say, okay, well, the minimum in the second list is, all right. And now I want str second. And so now I can use that same function to find the minimum, right? And then I can use those values for whatever I want, right? So it's really important that you understand the return value makes for a much more powerful function. All right. So we want to use that. All right. Now let's say that instead of giving you these lists to start, what if I actually just had a blank list? Right? What if I had just an empty list and now, okay, I'm going to ask the user for a certain number. So I'm going to say number, all right, and we're going to do app.get text input, right? And we're going to say how many numbers do you want in your list? All right. And so we're going to ask the user, how many numbers do you want in your list? All right. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a for loop. Okay. So for, let's do for x in, I don't want to use x again. Let's use for value in range. And the range is going to be what? Well, whatever number I just entered, right? So if I enter 5, then the value is going to be 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. So this for loop will iterate 5 times, all right? So now what do I want to do? Now I want to ask the user to enter the numbers into my list, into my nums list, let's say. Okay, so now I'm going to get rid of this stuff here. All right, so how do I do that? Well, now I'm going to say, Okay, let's use a variable. Um, how about number to add? All right. All right. So number to add, and I'm going to do app dot get text input, and I'm going to say, what number would you like to add to the list? All right. And so that's what's going to pop up on the screen for our user, right? And then what do I want to do? Okay. How do I add something onto a list? Right. I'm going to do nums is the list. So I'm going to do nums dot append. And then I'm going to do number to add, right? And I'm going to put that on to the end of each, onto the nums list. All right. Now, once I do that, okay, I'm just going to go down here just to make sure that everybody realizes what we've done. Okay, we're going to print the nums list. All right. And so now let's run it. Okay, how many numbers do you want to add? Let's just say 3. Okay, so now what do I have for value in range number? Oh, what did I forget to do? I forgot to make the number an integer, right? So that's a very important thing that we've talked about because I need it to be a number, right? All right. Now, okay, do I also need the number to add to be numbers? Yes, right? So I need to make those integers so that I can actually compare them to each other as well. All right, so let's hit run again. All right, so how many numbers? Let's say 3. All right, what number would you like to add? How about 4? How about 10? And how about 6? All right, so now I do that. Let's bring up the console here. 4, 10, and 6 are now my nums list, right? Okay, so now if I do that, then after I define the minimum number, let's say, all right, I'm going to print and then the min in my list is, and now we're going to do the str, and then we're going to do the minimum and nums, right? Now, nothing, we can't determine what is going to happen here until I actually enter values into my list. All right, so let's hit run. All right, how many numbers do I want to enter? So I'm going to enter 5. Okay, and now when I enter 5, here are my numbers: 10, 8, 0, -5, and 9. All right, so now you see 10, 8, 0, -5, 9. That's my list, right? And then it says the minimum in my list is -5, right? So it found the minimum of the value that I entered, and I could have entered any amount that I wanted, right? So that's really the importance of the return value, all right? And then also you got a little bit of the get text input and stuff in there too. All right, so now what you want to do is you want to complete the right side of the page to make sure that you understand how the functions with return values work.